He was very intentional in using this example because when you look at the Old Testament, in all of the prophets and the way that God spoke, and you read through the scriptures, God used always a metaphor between him and the nation of Israel as a shepherd and the sheep. The most famous one, if you will, or the one we often have been told to memorize, is the one I read this morning, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. That was David, who was a shepherd, describing, the Lord himself. Many of the kings were shepherds that were using it. God would describe the kings that he put over Israel as a shepherd I placed over my sheep. When God spoke against Israel and what was going on in Ezekiel 34, if you look at that, it's written in there, he's condemning the people put over Israel because they were not being the shepherds that they were supposed to be. So throughout, there's this understanding. And so Israel's sitting there under the authority of Rome, and they've lost a shepherd. For hundreds of years, they've realized that we've never had a king, we've never had a leader, we have no one that we can look to who's guiding the nation of Israel. God seemed silent because there wasn't even prophets at the time until John the Baptist started coming around again. And so for them, the whole concept of shepherd had been lost. Here Jesus comes in here and he says, I am the good shepherd. That triggered. They knew what was being described when Jesus was describing himself as a shepherd. And not only that, it's the word I am when he used that. John picks up on that, and he goes 6 times in his writings. He refers to comments Jesus says where he says, I am the bread of life. I am the way and the truth of life. I am the living water. I am the good shepherd. And the reason was because the Aramaic, Jesus spoke Aramaic, but it was written in Greek. And the Greek word for I am has the same meaning as the Hebrew word for Yahweh. And if you understand what that story is about, in Exodus 3:14, when Moses said to God, well, when I go to the people and I tell them, their God sent me, what do I say you are? And he says, I am. Tell them I am, which the word literally means, to be, to exist. I am. And so it was a word that was so holy, they would never use the word. They thought of other names for God and using it in other ways. But to say the word Yahweh was almost condemnable because it was so holy. So even in the when they switched languages, and even to do it, they were very cautious as Jews to even use a word that could also be associated with that. So when Jesus is saying, I am, he's in their faces and saying a word that they all immediately hear and they think, he's saying he's God. That's why so often they wanted to stone Jesus. Not because they just didn't like the guy, because they said he was blaspheming. He was calling himself God by the very uses of those words. So Jesus is revealing himself clearly to the people and to us to understand the authority that he has. When we follow him, he's the authority of God because he is God. He's the shepherd of his people, of which we are his flock. We are his own. But he also in here talks about his intent very clearly when he describes the analogy between a shepherd and a sheep. He uses 3 characters in here that is described. He also mentions this watchman, which there's really nothing to describe who that is. It could be God, it could be others, but in the reference, it doesn't really go anywhere with that. But the 3 that he does describe, he talks about, the thief and the robbers are one group that come in. They come in through the wrong way. And he talks about those thief and robbers, words to describe them. They steal and they kill and destroy. And so words that would describe them, if you think about it even in our life today, if we're following someone who's a thief and a robber and we're listening to them, you're thinking of loneliness, hopelessness. They live in fear and worry. Words that are killing ourselves and destroying our lives. These are the words that you'd connect with those in situations where you realize maybe I'm following the wrong person in here. The other one he uses is he talks about the hired hand. Hey, this is a person with good intentions. He's taking care of the sheep, he's doing stuff, and yet he's not invested in it. And so when trouble comes, it becomes meaningless and it fails. Maybe that could be, you could associate words that are more of individualism or personal ambition or, the pursuit of things to try to better ourselves, pride and things that we would say in themselves, they don't seem so bad. And yet when there's conflict or struggles, all of a sudden, the power to survive and to cope and stuff aren't there. And even when we look to people, and I think of my own life sometimes where people I respect in the faith who I begin, I want to hear what this person has to say, and I become more focused on the person instead of on Christ. And I become, well, Mark is this, Mark is that. And when people say it to me, I'm thinking, ooh, let's not do that because it's not about me. And we don't want to focus on the person. And when we do focus on the person, the problem is when trials come and struggles come, or even I know that I'm going to let you down because I'm not perfect by any stretch. And when that happens and the trouble, the power to survive isn't there. So what he really is bringing attention to, those things are really false and those things are wrong. But when you come through the truth, through the door, and you come through the good shepherd, the promise is that he provides an abundant life. That's his pursuit. That's his intent into our life. And the words as you go through Scripture of what come with Jesus are tied in with Jesus are words like peace and comfort, humility, love, joyfulness, wholeness. On and on and on, you could describe words that are words that you would almost think, oh, I would love to have that. Words that aren't out of our reach when we follow, the shepherd, when we follow our owner, when we follow the one we need to follow. Maybe the beauty of knowing him too is that Jesus describes it's very personal. When he says that we know him by name. With shepherds, when they would watch their sheep or when they have sheep, it's not like the farmers out here. I mean, I don't know of a single dairyman who can name their cows, but a shepherd in the day of Israel, they named their sheep by name. Like, Lucy, and we got Sadie. I mean, they could have 100 sheep and they know every one of them by name. And they would call them by name, and that sheep would respond based on the name. And I'm thinking, I see sheep, they're all white, or they're all one color. I mean, how could they do that? But the beauty of that, when he describes, Jesus says, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. I mean, that's an intimacy of the fact that I can name the person by name because I know them personally. I know what's going on in life. Like a shepherd would say, he could tell by the color traits. He could tell by maybe, personality things about certain sheep. He could tell by various parts of which sheep was which. He knew them. And so we know the same thing when it comes to our relationship with Christ. He knows us. He knows our sufferings. He knows our struggles. He knows our insecurities and fears. He knows our weaknesses and our regrets. He knows all of these things which make us unique to him. That's the relationship that's being described here when you talk about a shepherd and the way that he relates to us and the way that he knows us. But not only that, though, we talk about, and maybe the focus on this is really this idea that we get to be cared for by him. Because the beauty of sheep, I'm going to let you down because you probably are like, oh man, this guy's killing me. No, don't go anywhere. Stay here. Lucy here hasn't made, from my point of view. She, all her needs are met. I brought up some of the supplies that we have here. Of course, one of the reason she's nervous too is because really Alyssa's more her owner, takes care of her and stuff. So even when she's here, she's wondering where Alyssa is, and she knows her in the building somewhere, so she keeps looking for her. But these are all of her supplies, and so every one of them we have, based on particular things. She's kind of a crate dog, and so she sleeps in her crate at night. That's her crate, and some toys, and again some food stuff, but we also have some medicinal stuff, if things are going on, and it's just part of taking care of a dog and making sure they're healthy. And the thing about it, this passage here, when we think of a shepherd and sheep, is understanding that there is a relationship that the shepherd has, that Jesus is describing here, where they provide and they care for their sheep. Verse 3, he talks about the fact that the shepherd leads his sheep out. It's something like, this idea he's drawing out and he's leading the way. And then he says, when they do come, he says, I go ahead of them. That imagery of almost that in our own life, of knowing that we don't journey through life on our own trying to figure it out, but we have the confidence of knowing that when we have a shepherd who will go before us and he leads us into the situations in our life where we're going, and we can trust him in that.